between the schach that we say that if let's say you have pieces of schach next to each other, but instead of being adjacent to each other, the schach is separated from each other. So if it's separated within 3 tfachim, so then there's the rule of lavud that joins it together. And the chidush is that we look at it as if it's lower down, and if it would be lower down, it would create more shade than sun. So the sukkah is a kosher sukkah. But then the Gemara says that even if it's more than 3 tfachim, the rabbi in the Gemara says separating, but if the schach itself is a tefach wide, we look at the schach as if it comes down and fills the gap. Meaning the schach is here or here, but if this piece of schach is a tefach wide, 3 to 4 inches, that once it has a certain significant amount, we look at it as if it fills the gap and it comes right down. The Gemara says it's only provided it's a tefach. But if it's less than a tefach, we won't have this rule of chavet rami. So that's what the Gemara was challenging. The Gemara says on Chaf Beis Lamed Beis 22b1, and this is to be. That's the place to be on the Gemara, right? The Gemara said we're talking about the rules of Eruvit, carrying on. We spoke about if you have an alleyway, and the alleyway is shared by the members of the courtyard, and the alleyway opens up to the street, to the public street, and the rabbis are concerned that if you're going to carry, if you're not going to do something to make it clear that this is private property and that's public property, people will come to carry from the private property to public property, and so therefore, because really the alleyway is private property because it's 3 walls. And therefore, it's open on the 4th side. So therefore, what did the rabbi say? And it's shared by members of the courtyard. So it has some similarity to a public area. And if you're going to carry over there, they're going to come to without doing anything to make you recognize that this is a separate area. You're going to come to carry in a right outside in the actual public domain.
Wall. That's an alleyway. Someone's not going to walk through.
Right. Let's say there's a door going from the alleyway into the courtyard. So you have it's open in front, then it goes into 3 walls, and therefore, so what do you do? So you put up a korah, like a beam that goes across. And let's say this from one wall from the wall number 1, wall number 2. You put a beam that goes across, that everyone could see that this is a separate, and therefore that carry within that alleyway. So now the Gemara talks about the dimensions of there's certain laws about that beam. What's this law about this beam? We're now 3 lines from the top in the Hebrew, and in the English, it's you'll see it should be 22. It's 22b1, right? The first paragraph. If you have and the Gemara says that the beams have to be, it says now we have 2 beams that are twin beams. They're right next to each other, so they're right adjacent to each other. Let's say beam number 1 and beam number 2. Each beam is not strong enough to hold, it's not wide enough and strong enough to hold a half of a brick. A brick is 3 tvachim by 1 tvachim by 1.5. That means 3 tvachim figure is 9 to 12 inches by 1.5, which is around 4.5 to 6 inches. That's the size of a brick. So you have the two beams that are twin beams. Each one doesn't have the strength to hold a brick. They have the halacha is that there has to be a certain strength of that beam. It has to be some sort of permanent type of thing that permanent thing is something that could hold half a brick. So if you join the two beams together, and if they would go ahead and then you would be able to put a brick on it, then you do not need to bring another beam. So even though each beam is not the size, not enough, doesn't fit enough to be able to hold the brick, but the two beams coming together have the ability to hold the brick. So therefore, that will join together to make up a beam. So you don't have to have a beam that the beam itself is able to do it to hold the brick. You could even have two beams that come together that also be sufficient. Now, however, Shimon Gamliel says, "Im mekablis ariach la'orko shloshet tvachim, ein tzarich lahavi kara acheres." So he holds he's even more lenient. He said he doesn't even require you to have the beam a tefach wide. Meaning, until now, we said that you have to have the beam. The first opinion says the beam has to be together. Either the beam itself has to be a tefach, or together this beam with the adjacent beam form a width of a tefach. But the width of a tefach has the ability to hold a brick 1.5 tefachim wide. Because if you put a brick that's 1.5 tefachim wide, so there'll be an extra quarter of a tefach on this side of the brick, and there'll be an extra quarter of this second tefach on the other side of the brick. So let's say this is a brick. This is the beam. If I put something on this that's a little wider than this beam, that's right. I put a half a brick. This beam is one tefach wide. It's, let's say, 3 to 4 inches wide. It could hold something that's actually wider than it, but as long as it has the ability to hold a brick that's 1.5 tefach wide. This is 1 tefach wide. So as long as I have the beam itself to be 1 tefach wide, I'm good. And because 1 tefach wide beam could hold a 1.5 tefach wide. Meaning, if the beam is less than a tefach wide, it won't be able to hold a 1.5 tefach brick. But if it's 1 tefach wide, even if it itself doesn't have the dimensions of 1 tefach wide, but only joining the next beam together with it makes a tefach, that's fine. But the beams are right. This opinion holds the beams have to be together. The next opinion says they don't even need to be together. You could even spread the beams apart a little bit, and then you can. And that's what Shimon Gamliel says. Shimon Gamliel says in Mekabos Riach LaOrko Shloshet Tvachim Ein Tzarich Lavi Kora Acheres. And Rashi explains. He says even if there's no tefach wide of the beams, the two beams together don't even make up a tefach. Let's say the two beams together make up 3/4 of a tefach, less than a tefach. But if you take the beams and you move them apart a little bit, and then you put the brick on it, and it would be sufficient, and it could hold the brick, even though it's not as if it would be together, it would not be able to hold the brick. But separately, if you move it separated, it will be able to hold the brick. That's also good. It has to be able to put a brick on it. That has to be able to put you do not have to bring another beam. But if not, but if it will not be able to hold the brick that 3 by 1.5, even when you separated the beams on top, it's not. Then you wouldn't be good at. It wouldn't be a kosher korah to use. If one of them was higher, you have the two beams, but one beam was higher than the other one. Now, do you look at these beams as if they're together or not? They're not. Meaning they would, if you would lower it down, it would be exactly next to it. But it's now not lower. It's not next to it. It wouldn't be able to hold the brick by itself. But do we consider this beam that's over here and this beam over here? Do we look at it as if it's lower? And would we join the two? So Rav Yosef Hudomer Royan Heliona, we look at the top beam, Ki'ilu Hilamata, as if it's what? It's lower down. And the bottom one, we look heel and mila, as if it's up. We look at them as if they're next to each other. But we consider it as if, and if it would be next to each other, it would be able to hold the brick. So that's good enough. Even though as is, it's not each one because they're not next to each other. But we have this idea that we say chavet rami, that it goes down and it fills the gap. The top one cannot be higher than 20 amot, because in order to see something, if you're too high, you can't see it. So therefore, it looks like a menorah can't be too high. You can't make a menorah. You can't have a schach. A sukkah can't be too high. More than 20 amot, people can't see. So too over here, if it's more than 20 amot, if this beam, if the top beam, but you want to join them together, so you don't say if the top beam is above 20, we look at it as if it came lower than 20. No, as long as the top beam is not higher than 20 amot, and the bottom beam is not lower than 10 tvachim, as long as we have those dimensions, then you're within the kosher space to 10 tvachim and 20 amot. I don't know if he's starting yet. Okay, I'm starting. Okay, so that's what the Gemara says, and we'll continue. We'll continue on Monday. Thank you, everybody, for your. So every word of Torah, every word is another mitzvah. You got it, so it's they clock Kennedy at 200 words a minute. So 10 minutes, 2,000 mitzvot. 10 minutes is 2,000 mitzvot. But we did more than 10 minutes today. We did more like 15 minutes around. Have a great day, everybody.